Hello, I'm Ted Gamble, Chair of the British Architectural Library Trust. The Trust is the nonprofit entity that supports the library and collections of the Royal Institute of British Architects in London. This is the third in our 2023 lecture series, which we're presenting in collaboration with the 20th Century Society, the UK-based organization that focuses on architectural education and preserving significant 20th century buildings in Britain. Today's lecture is entitled Charles Holden, an architect of many styles and subtle forms. It will be presented by Elain Harwood, a senior architectural investigator and historian with Historic England, the body that advises the British government on historic buildings and archaeology in England. She has worked with the organization, previously known as English Heritage, for 39 years. Elain studied at the Architectural Association in London and received a PhD from the University of Bristol. She is the co-editor of the 20th Century Society's journal, 20th Century Architecture, and of its biographical series, 20th Century Architects. She has also published numerous books, including Space, Hope, and Brutalism, which won the Alice Davis Hitchcock Medallion in Art Book Award for 2016, Art Deco Britain, Brutalist Britain, and the Pevsner City Guide to her hometown of Nottingham. Elain is also an honorary fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects. The interlocutor for today's lecture will be David Lewis, Professor of Architectural History at Oxford University. He is a noted architectural historian and author of Modernizing Tradition, the Architectural Thoughts of Giles Gilbert Scott. David also presented the previous lecture in this series on Giles Gilbert Scott. Following Elain's lecture, David will join her for further conversation. I'm now honored to introduce Elain Harwood.
And I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much. That was lovely. And most embarrassing. I've got something to live up to now. So I'm just trying to share my screen. Oh, let's go back one. And there we go. Such efficiency. Greetings, everybody. Morning, lunchtime, tea time, wherever you are. And this was exciting for me because it's not a field I've really done much research on myself. It's been a good excuse to go back to buildings and also to visit the Midhurst Sanatorium, which I've long wanted to do. And it's just been restored, as you will see. So Charles Holden, they're his dates. And I think their dates are really kind of crucial, because they're between traditional architecture and modern. So he's what? He dies about the same time as Frank Lloyd Wright. He's a decade younger. But you'll see sort of parallels, I hope, in his career. Curtis Green, another British architect who went through a great range of traditional and proto-modern styles, is his exact contemporary. But most British architects are sort of slightly older, slightly younger. And Giles Gilbert Scott makes a very good comparison, just slightly younger than Charles Holden. So he wrote, it comes simply to this, that I was born in an industrial age, but I was urged by a passion for building and for service, and that I have an invincible belief in the power of the human soul, the God in man, to rise above and master ugliness and desolating conditions. So he's a quiet, mild-mannered man who in life maintained an austere, almost aesthetic lifestyle. He and his partner never married. Margaret Holden, she was styled, had been married to an absolute desolate drunkard who'd she'd left after years of abuse. And so I suppose she couldn't get a divorce. And they lived very quietly in Hertfordshire. Holden was born in 1875 in Bolton, Lancashire. So I never lost lost his northern accent. If the Americans here can hear me talking, I don't sound like a lot of the British voices that you've heard over this series, and I'm from the North Midlands, so Holden's voice would have been slightly more northern than mine. But beneath this sort of, and you know, his background was modest. He's the fifth child, only boy, of shopkeeper who went bankrupt. His mother, he left school at 14. His mother died when he was 15. And his oldest sister, Emma, had married a local surveyor. And after taking a course in engineering draftsmanship, Holden worked for his brother-in-law, and I think his quality was soon recognised. But beneath that quiet veneer burned a bright creative fire. I mean, I think this picture here shows from a sort of cartoon of a luncheon in the 1930s, and you've got all these bigwigs, all these great architects. There's Sir Edwin Lutyens with his medal, Royal Academy medal, President's medal, at the front there, and you've got there's Holden, tiny figure lurking in the middle, and all these garrulous chaps around him. And I thought this card sort of showed up perhaps the importance the man achieved to be in this company, but how very quiet he was. Colleagues said they would have liked to have, asked him questions, and that they never did, and never could get him to talk really, except in a very modest way. The British Architectural Library and the drawings collection holds some of his correspondence, and that brings out this sort of gentle, nice man. But beneath that veneer, there's something more going on. And the early paintings and drawings by friends whom he'd met in Bolton perhaps suggest a more cultured background than I've sort of suggested from these modest beginnings. His hero was not an architect, but the American poet Walt Whitman, who enjoyed a cult following among the young intelligentsia of Holden's native Bolton. Holden was entranced by Whitman's writings throughout his life, and seems to have found inspiration in the poet's sort of rugged expressions of those of universal themes of love and nature, and the sort of simple, rough, perhaps free verse. And in June 1905, Holden published a piece anonymously in the Architectural Review called "If Whitman Had Been an Architect." And it's one of his very few published pieces of writing. And it's very sort of call to arms. It says, "Come, you modern buildings, come. Throw off your mantle of deceits, your cornices, pilasters, mouldings, swags, scrolls. Behind them all, behind your dignified proportions, your picturesque groupings, your arts and crafts, prettinesses and exaggerated techniques, behind and beyond them all hides the one I love." And so let's think about the buildings I'm going to show you in terms of trying to find some kind of inner truth. So we're on the cusp here between arts and crafts movement and something more stripped down. So we're thinking about those people like Louis Sylvester Sullivan, like Frank Lloyd Wright, I suppose, and that interest of Holden's in Whitman at an early age introduced him to a like-minded group that included the artists Muirhead Bone and Francis Dodd. And I think these painters were chief amongst a stalwart body of lifelong friends and central to the formation of his creative sensibility. And the buildings of the 1900s have decoration where it was most important. And Holden was very keen to work with artists as well as sculptors in particular. But their buildings are also strong and simple, and as is very well seen, is economical designs for hospitals and sanatoria. Most of his buildings were for professionals, organizations, public bodies, charities. So many, like the London University and the Underground Railway, on the sort of cross between public and private, publicly funded autonomous bodies, or which became, like the hospitals, later part of the public sector following the creation of our welfare state in 1947. And public libraries, obviously always public. So in let's go back to a bit of the biography. So here he is with his, these are three of the older sisters, and the house they're sitting outside, number 4 of the Avenue in Bolton, was by brother-in-law with a very young Charles Holden. So he's working for David Green when he's about 16. And he was articled then to a Manchester architect, Edward W. Leeson, and then shortly afterwards also enrolled at the Manchester School of Art and the Manchester Technical School. So this was sort of training that you'd expect for somebody to become, a good local practitioner. Perhaps Scott Green was a producer of volume house building, but you might have expected him to do something like this kind of building. This is a building by Leeson, the Moston Conservative Club in Manchester, from the time that Holden was working with him. But after a short time with Leeson and for another local architect, Jonathan Simpson in Bolton, he left Lancashire for a year at the combining studies at the Royal Academy with working for C.R. Ashby, one of the great arts and crafts architects, built relatively little, great friend at this time of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I think this time with Ashby was really quite pivotal. And it's 1898 is when he begins living with Margaret Steedman, who with her 8-year-old son had left the abusive husband and was struggling to make ends meet as a nurse and midwife. And so they became lifelong partners. And I think this photo, it looks almost like a sort of old-time American outback with Margaret in her shawl there. You could think of the sort of stalwart Midwest painters producing images like this. But to support Margaret and her son, Holden joins the firm of Harry Percy Adams, slightly older architect who, son of a doctor, fairly successful, and in particular, an exceptional planner with a specialism in hospitals. Now, hospitals are really some of the biggest building of the 19th century, in which services and planning, separating male and female patients, different kinds of diseases, sick and healthy. The planning of these had to be incredibly precise and done on very small budgets. This is the Royal Victoria Hospital in Newcastle upon Tyne by Adams, with W. Liscon Newcomb, won in competition in 1899. So just at the point where Holden is joining them. And I think they show that Adams is a decent architect, but these are very much the sort of exterior equations that you might expect of their time. Bit Queen Anne, a little bit ponderous. especially on the scale of a hospital building. And so most of Holden's published work is the early days until is published as H. Percy Adams, with Holden providing the elevations. And he soon takes on major commissions. He becomes a partner in 1907. They take on a further partner, a friend of Holden's from Yorkshire, Lionel Pearson, in 1913. So this was the sort of first major work in which you can see Holden appearing to compare the Newcastle Hospital with this. This was a hospital for children. You might just be able to read the signage. Once the trees come out, you won't get such a good clear picture of this, but the Belgrave Hospital for Children, it was replacing a hospital founded in central London, in Pimlico, which had become too small. And so it was a charity treating children, poor children. And Adams does the conventional cruciform plan and had prepared elevations, which Holden then revised, in which he acknowledges quite publicly a debt to Philip Webb and Henry Wilson, writing to Nicholas Pevsner and John Summerson, architectural historians or architect turned historian in the 1950s. And here's the side elevation. I think the work going on there is to the road rather than the hospital itself. It's now flat. It was derelict for years and really survives because it was squatted. And so there were people living in it that managed to prevent any vandalism or arson. And so it was restored in the 1980s and converted very successfully to flats. So very modest, small hospital with that slightly bigger service block at the back, which I assume is the sort of kitchens, dining area and that sort of thing. And another competition when quickly followed for the British Committee in Constantinople. So a hospital serving British forces overseas and British expats. And a number of designs survive that show Holden moving from sort of quasi-Middle Eastern styles into this very stripped down building, very tight on its site, and how you see how little detail decoration actually appears on the final elevation. It's sort of clean white, rather. I hope you can see because this sort of central tower, again containing the services, having perhaps the most distinctive look of a minaret about it, but that's about all. Here's the plan, and you can see how it's sort of pushed onto a tiny, tiny site in the heart of Constantinople, what's now Istanbul. And very grateful to my friend John East for supplying these photographs. John is a great photographer who travels the world taking pictures. So here begins the first major big work, King Edward VII Sanatorium at Midhurst in Sussex. It's about 500 feet up on a long ridge overlooking the ridge of the South Downs. I wish I could turn my camera the other way and shown you the view. Pedaling up the hill, not quite so good. King Edward, a bit like current King Charles, had to wait a long time for Mummy to die. And in that time, took up a great interest in firefighting, which sounds a bit perilous for the heir to the throne, and also hospitals. And the King Edward Fund was what supported a lot of this wave of good quality hospital building at the turn of the century. And many of these such hospitals are still in use today. But the great scourge of the Edwardian times was tuberculosis, cured now, of course, thanks to a vaccine in the 1950s that turned a lot of these hospitals redundant or into care homes, essentially, which is how this place survived until about 2007. It's been derelict, and you can see that it's just being, or has been, restored. And the garden in front, laid out by no less than Gertrude Jekyll, the garden designer who worked with Edwin Lutyens, being restored. So it's beginning to turn around and look its best. And so this is the main front with the central part here. The first class patients, these are beds like it was designed for people who could afford to pay or pay something. And so the better, who couldn't go into the workhouse or the charities that supported the very poor. And so the best rooms with the biggest verandas were along the middle, and certainly humbler rooms at the end. And the really ill people had the best views at the top here. If I show you the whole layout, you'll get a sense of it much better. So these are in the days before a vaccine, the only real cure, inverted commas, was lots of fresh air, good food, healthy eating. But it's a horrible respiratory disease. The clock tower never happened, but the rest of it more or less did. At the back here, you've got the entrance, dining room, and then there's a broad link. And on this side, service quarters. It's a flying V formation, bit like a lot of our sanatoria for mental illness at this time. So the sun can be captured here, you see. The women on this side, the men on this side, reading rooms, hydrotherapy. So I suppose physiotherapy and watery conditions, lots of stunning views, nice gardens. Chapel over here will come to later. The little lodge you will come to later as well. Here's the plan showing that more clearly. So there's the entrance with this broad corridor, dining rooms, kitchens, servants' quarters on the female side here, women here, men there, and on the first floor, these extra big balconies for those that were paying a bit more. And the competition was set up by the king himself, really to get doctors to set out how they proposed to treat tuberculosis. And the king himself paid a visit to Switzerland, where the mountain air was regarded as particularly good for curing better off people. So here's the entrance as original, with the plaque foundation laid by the king. Here it is today, so newly restored. One of the things that's really confusing, you see how simple the brickwork is. We've got diaper pattern, but a lot of this is stretcher-bond brickwork, so not an expensive pattern of building, mixed in with some local stone. The builder in 1908 called it a good piece of quiet domestic-looking architecture, such as should characterize a sanatorium. So nothing the King's Arms look pretty fancy. And here's the old photo of the garden front. You see that brickwork. So normally stretcher bond, so all the long side of the brick showing, is really the cheapest way of building that you could do. And here it is today. And you can see by the scaffolding and the blue at the far end how building is still going on, that it's now being adapted as flats, huge enabling development of houses slightly down the hill. And they've all seemed to have been given sort of standard outdoor furniture. So it's giving that semblance of how it once looked really, really well. And all 60s editions have been stripped away. So it's slowly coming back. And lots of these downpipes, hopperheads, all with the date 1905 and ER Edward VII. And here's that internal wing. Here's the big window is for the dining room, which looked like this. And here, filled with patients and with the staff at the back. And the kitchen, very modest kitchen, feeding so many 170 patients. And the medical officers had these rather slightly grander quarters. Here's the hydrotherapy room. And to the side, the local brewer, John Brickwood from Portsmouth, donated money for the chapel. And this V formation, again, separating the male and female patients, who will meet both facing the central chancel at the end there. Bath stone, York paving floors, and underfloor heating, a novelty, said the builder. Plaster ceilings, it is just standing there. There's the plan. You've got the altar there, but you've also got an altar outside, so that you could have rather blustery outdoor services. And there's that outdoor pulpit today. If I'd stood further back, I'd have landed in a very large soggy pond. So apologies that these aren't better pictures. And I want you to know, keep this very simple stone formation in your head. This is the women's entrance, the men's entrance over there, rather still with some scaffolding on it. This is the chancel, the altar as it was. And I sort of stuck my camera against the glass, and you can just see, can't you, that much of it is actually still there. But they're currently not used. There's a new swimming pool being built behind it, and I presume it will be used perhaps for yoga and meditation and a variety of activities by the new residents. And here's the lodge as it was, and as that is today. 3-bedroom lodge at the entrance there. And a boiler house. And you can see here some of this new building. It's quite stylish, that's been added on. There were originally about 5 houses for medical staff, and then more added for National Health Service staff in later years. Then the other, I think, major pre-war building I want to focus on was when Holden won a competition for Bristol Central Library, replacing an 18th century institution. Bristol, in the west of England, Britain's second port, until Liverpool took over in the 19th century. So a city of long traditions, and it was one of the first in Britain to have a public library that its citizens could borrow, which was essentially free, at least in part. It got entangled with a subscription library in the 18th century. But by the 1899, this was far too small for a growing city, and a local banker left £50,000 for a new building. By 1901, the city council had found a prominent site next to the cathedral, and in 1902 held a competition which was won by Holden, who produced their design in his own time. So it's not while producing hospitals, but you can see on the drawings it's still signed H. Percy Adams. And this is the arts and crafts perspective. You've got a real there, a real medieval part, Norman indeed, gateway was actually older than what we can see of the cathedral today, which is 14th century. It's a very interesting plan. So you've got a sort of medievalized image here next to real medieval buildings. And here it survives as of 2 weeks ago. And you can see the decoration, you can see the mix of stone. We'll come back to those. And again, looking at Norman Shaw, I think particularly in the way these oriels and the way there's 3 of them, it's a bit Sparrow's House. But these segmental arches showing King Alfred, Chaucer, and the Venerable Bede. So you've got 2 literary figures amongst those. Artist Charles Pibsworth, and other enrichments by William Aumonier. We're going to meet his son later. And I love the sort of mix of green stone with Bath stone, giving you these contrasts here. And here's the entrance hall, which had glass by Benjamin Helson, most of which that bit's gone. But compare this with Charles Rennie Mackintosh. Now we know that with Muirhead Bone, Charles Holden had visited Glasgow and certainly knew the first stage of the School of Art, built from 1897 to 99. But this library wing excuses a pre-fire photograph, obviously, 1979, showing there's a projecting bows in some way. Contrast this with the side and rear elevations of Holden's library in Bristol. There's that medieval gateway again. There's a sort of staircase, and then there's bulk of the library and the storage spaces tucked away down a very steep hill. Here it is, as it is now, and compare, if you will, with sort of Mackintosh's take on arts and crafts. This is much more simplified. And both architects showing adept, Shaw and in particular, and this had prompted this debate by John Summerson, writing an essay in the 1970s, suggesting that, rather than Holden cribbing Mackintosh, actually Mackintosh could have learnt much from Holden. I don't think probably wouldn't have seen Bristol, but they're operating in this sort of parallel field, and that a building like this has just as much claim to be revered as a work by Mackintosh. There's this bottom bit here is the caretaker's flat, or was. And the plan is interesting. There's that entrance from the main street front I showed you, and got the ground floor, which is now all the lending library. Originally was largely the newsroom, where men mainly would go to read the papers, with a magazine room here. And if you wanted to borrow a book, you had to queue in this lobby, the borrower's lobby, and there are the desks. Because until the 1920s, in most public libraries, in Britain at least, the books that you borrowed were kept in a store, and you had to order off a catalogue. You weren't allowed to browse the shelves. Whether they thought you'd secrete the books into your pocket, I do not know, but it was absolutely common practice. So this means that the entrance hall, stair, and the reference library become the sort of main features of interest. So here we have this low vaulted entrance covered in sky, blue glass mosaic. Ted, when giving his kind introduction, didn't mention I did my first degree in Bristol. So going back a couple of weeks ago was fascinating because I spent an awful lot of time working in this building because it was so much nicer than the university library. And you went up the stair, and then another low exhibition hall. Here's the library staff. It opening in 1907 or 1908, not quite sure when this was taken. And here's the reference library as it survives today. So classical, but pretty stripped down classical and double height. The furniture also designed by Holden. This gives you a better sense of the scale. The public aren't normally allowed up here, so I was very honoured to be able to come and take these pictures. And moving on, because I'm conscious of time, the more buildings followed in the Law Society here, 1834, where my cursor is, by Louis Villamy, extended in 1902 to 4 by Holden. I'm still waiting for a reply to get into this building to take photographs for this lecture. I did email to say they were running a bit late, but apologies. If I can, I will still try to get in. This, again, is a low ground floor with a big committee room up above. It's essentially a club for lawyers and a society honorary body. I suppose a little bit like the RIBA is for architects. Norwich House, a speculative office building in Holborn, 1903 to 5. And again, these classical elements more strong, a mannered top, a little bit like we saw in Constantinople. And then another competition win, the headquarters of the British Medical Association, on the site of previously the medics had operated from the Westminster Life and Fire Office building. And so it's tight site on the Strand was rather determined by the original building, though they got a bit more land at the back to make an L shape and to add a library. It's now became the embassy of the Rhodesia, now the Republic of Zimbabwe. There's the plan. There's that corner I showed you. There's the library in the bit of extra land at the back. And here, Holden brought in the sculptor Jacob Epstein, New York Jewish, in origin, settled in Britain, introduced to Holden by his friend Francis Dodd, who did that first sketch I showed you. Now, I suppose he's the most of the many sculptors that Holden worked with. He's had the longest association with Epstein. He was attracted by the boldness and originality of Epstein's work, which kind of mirrored his own and this sort of appreciation of the sort of roughness and honesty that he saw in Whitman. And Epstein's work challenged the sort of formal and stylistic conventions of academic sculpture into something more free and honest. Perhaps a bit too honest, because the figures here were controversial. It's not the only time that Epstein was controversial, but this was a particular problematic case. The building was opposite the offices of the National Vigilance Association, who, of course, objected to the figures, which seemed to exemplify Whitman's "I sing the body of electric." It's showing the ages of man. And of course, there's a lot of naked men on view, which those nice middle-class ladies would not have liked. The first one, though, was a woman, mother and child, symbolizing motherhood and birth. And even that didn't go down well. But I suppose the British Medical Association were more accepting of nudity than other clients, and they were perfectly happy. But when, in 1935, the building was sold to the Rhodesian government, the High Commissioner Lanigan O'Keefe thought them inappropriate. In 1937, after George VI's coronation had passed along the Strand and the building had been festooned with bunting, when the bunting came down, so too did an awful lot of the bits of the figures. You can see sort of mutilated wrecks here along the sort of tympanum of the design, if you will. And they claimed that a portion of the sculpture fell, and the London County Council ordered the owners to make buildings safe. And Holden accepted this lopping off. Epstein, less happy, as you can imagine, but for him, they still convey something of Epstein's intention to portray the 7 ages of man and have not lost their decorative value. And indeed, we can see the remains like we might enjoy the Roman or Greek sculpture today. I think the problems were either, where's my cursor gone? That water was getting in here, that the stone wasn't properly laid. Epstein was insistent on carving from a single block of stone, and I suspect it was therefore not laid on bed like this, but stood on end, which makes it more prone to attack by British raid. I think that the sort of last major building before the First World War, another competition win in Bristol, this time in 1908 for a hospital. See those sort of slightly Middle East qualities here. New additions to the Bristol Royal Infirmary. And here, by 1908, you can just see that Charles Holden, as now a partner, has got his name on the perspective. 1910, 180 beds, 3 operating theatres and a casualty department. And what survives is really this, the frontage. The rest of the building completely swallowed up in later extensions for the National Health Service. But there it is, still there today. Now, I wanted you to remember that very austere entrance to the chapel at Midhurst. During the First World War, Holden, mid-30s, served in the ambulance column before moving to the Directorate of Graves Registration and Enquiries. Yeah, he'd have been 30. And then to the Imperial War Graves Commission in 1917. And he never actually becomes a Quaker. But he starts going to meetings, and I think that gives up the Anglican Church. And I think this very simplistic, this sort of simple form of worship was something that was very special to him and to Margaret, who does become a Quaker at this time. Now, this is the War Memorial, again in Bristol, to Clifton College, big boys' public school, from which a lot of ex-pupils fought and lost their lives in the First World War. And this is about as Gothic as Holden ever got. But for the Imperial War Graves Commission, which is commemorating those who'd fallen in northern France, he produces this series. I think there are 67 cemeteries that he worked on. And he was like the lowest of 4 principal architects, along with Herbert Baker, Reginald Blomfield, and Edwin Lutyens, who got in first and got a lot of the major jobs. But obviously, Passchendaele was perhaps in 1916, apologies, was really the bloodiest and most awful of all those many conflicts in the Somme. And this very simple but monumental war memorial perhaps sort of said all that needed to be said, stripped bare. And I think this series of war memorials, I only know them through photographs. It would be a very solemn but interesting journey to see more of them, to really forge the link between that pre-war arts and crafts work and the later modernism. And the hospitals post-war, First World War, get separated off. So you see Lionel Pearson, the junior partner appointed in 1913, taking on most of the hospital commissions and continuing to work really in a neo-Georgian style. With the exception of St. Luke's Hospital in Valletta in Malta, another semi-military hospital, I suppose, but here for the British Public Works Department, for what was then a colony, looking at autonomy and becomes independent in 1965. So still there, massive hospital, prominently cited, the site determined by Adams. It's probably his last work. He dies in 1930. So, which is why Pearson is taking on more and more hospitals. But here, Holden doing the elevations and this massing and the central tower, terrifically important. And I think looking at, apologies for the slide, it's a drawing by Beresford Pite, slightly older arts and crafts architect, who also did quite a bit of hospital work. And he produces this concept for the City of London's St. Bartholomew's Hospital, a hospital of medieval foundations with largely 18th century buildings even today. And he's looking at New York, and he's looking at the produces this concept called the Tower of Healing, of wards springing on a tight site from a central tower that's got all the services in. And it's not quite there yet with the letter, but it's getting towards that idea. And of course, as you saw in the landmark tower overlooking the harbour, great symbol, and perhaps a symbol of British generosity, and how we're good to our colonials, really. Now I think Malta is torn between locals and a lot of British expats, because attracted by the fantastic climate. But there was a lot of tension in the 60s. But out of that comes a separate strand in which Holden concentrated, and that's his work for London Underground. He first met Frank Pick in 1915, when the Board of Trade exhibited German and Austrian goods. This is in the middle of the First World War, when we're fighting them, from showing how good German and Austrian design was, product design, I suppose, forerunner of the Bauhaus, and how the Werkbund, how bad British design was. And so Pick and Holden were instrumental in setting up a sort of British answer to the Deutsche Werkbund, the Design and Industries Association. It still goes in some modest form. Frank Pick was the commercial manager of the Underground Group, an amalgam of bus companies and underground stations, which for chairman was Albert Stanley, Lord Ashfield, who'd grown up in Detroit. So he knew the value of the big building, and Pick brought to it the value of good design, and they were a really great team. Now, this modest station, Clapham Common, where I used to live, built in 1900, refaced, remodeled, and signed by Pick with Holden. These Pick determined these logos, the roundel, the underground map, and Nicholas Pevsner called Frank Pick in 1952 the greatest patron of the arts whom this century has so far produced in England. The posters, the places where you put the posters, the sort of quality, that is a blocked door obviously, the whole quality of design starts to come out piece by piece as Holden gets drawn more and more into designing. So the first job was to refront some of the Victorian Edwardian stations that had been absolutely plastered with signage, largely tiled, fairly rough. Most of them have now gone in turn. This is pretty much all that's left. But then there follows a whole series of new stations. Here's Clapham South, going down, first of all, that southern extension of the Northern Line. So here you are, if you don't know London, central London sort of up the top, Clapham Common, and then going, this is as far south as you can get on the underground. There's lots of competition from the overground railways still in private hands, constrained how much the underground could expand. But this they got through all the way down to Morden, which is now in London, but then in Surrey. You can see Wimbledon Park. There is where the tennis is played over here. So it's a sort of handy, quick way of getting to the tennis. Tooting Beck. And can you see the roundel, the order, the classical order is a variant of the underground logo roundel, but done in 3D. And there's increasingly a sort of distinctive style appearing on these stations that was widely admired, and a piece of product design. Stina Rasmussen was a Danish visitor to London, said British modern architecture is rubbish except the tube stations. And this has really becomes a sort of common talk. So I put in Collier's Wood next down the line, opposite the pub. Note is now the Charles Holden. No reason for that name except to celebrate his association with the underground station. And I wondered how many pubs and roads, I know there's a Palladio supermarket in Vicenza, but you might like to think of other pubs and streets and things that have been named after architects. South Wimbledon and Morden, where the always intended to have a building on top. They could take flats, or here you've got a 50s office building. And then the remodelling of Piccadilly Circus station, this great circular concourse with uplighters, and sort of rethinking the classical format because there was no room here for a classical order. So the light fittings do service instead. You could even buy a postcard of it. And then following Ealing Common, which was largely built by Stanley Heaps. The Heaps was Holden's great rival and thought by Pick to be not so good. And so Holden gets the job of producing new stations on the Piccadilly line. That's the blue one. And Holden, with his usual modesty, says it's a brick box with a concrete lid. And yes, it is, but it's also an exquisite piece of modern design. The proportions are excellent, excuse the old photograph. And the band's brickwork fit with the bands of glazing, and the signage is there. It's all simple. It does all you need. You could think of it as the work of a Quaker, if you will. And this was built in design 29, built 1930-31. But in 1930, Pick and Holden, together with Ashfield's secretary, Mr. W.P.N. Edwards, go on a trip to the Netherlands, parts of Germany, Denmark and Sweden. This is June and July 1930. Their targets are not the great modern buildings of the Bauhaus style, or certainly not to see the work of Le Corbusier. They don't go to Paris, but they go to see Willem Dudok, the poor man's Frank Lloyd Wright, very much inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright's folio edition, which was better known in Germany and the Netherlands than it was in Britain. Hilversum Town Hall is his masterpiece. He was the architect to the new town of Hilversum, and just being completed when Holden and Pick saw it. And they also went, I think Holden was more impressed by classical architecture, stripped classical architecture, like the police station in Copenhagen, than he was by the buildings in Stockholm. But you'll see the influence that Stockholm Public Library had. And he also enjoyed going to the Stockholm exhibition, which Asplund was the master planner, and which brought modernism to Stockholm and was a precursor of the New York World State Fair and the Festival of Britain. So here is the tube map, if you're not familiar with how to get around London, and particularly that's sort of central London in the Circle line. So I'm looking at this dark blue line. There's Sudbury Town. But Holden's most famous stations, most important stations, this little group here, extending the Piccadilly line northwards. It's a slightly old map, but it's clearer than the current one. And Arno's Grove, now you see the Stockholm influence. You've got the tracks are at an angle to the street, and the circle is a way of turning surreptitiously through 45 degrees without the architecture showing it. And Southgate Station with bus station, Oakwood. There's so many of these buildings that Holden had to bring in other architects. C.H. James is a architect based in Hampstead Garden suburb who did most of Oakwood, originally Enfield West. And you see how the elements of design carry on through to the signage. This is on the street front, saying tube station this way. You couldn't really miss it. And the platforms and the concrete for the poster and where the sign is stuck on, all still there and all very carefully thought through. And this is Cockfosters, the terminus. Rather fancy. Pick was never satisfied. Pick wanted more and more elaborate, more designs and sort of new, more frills and more fancy. So if you're coming in from Heathrow by road, you'll see Austere Station with this great tower that lights up at night. Very, I think, inspired by what they'd seen in Amsterdam at the Olympic site. And this is the last major pre-war Second World War station, East Finchley, with a archer by Eric Aumonier, the son of William, who'd worked on Bristol Central Library. Then these mod staircases, there's one on the platform I'm standing on as well, particularly modern looking. Post-war, he completed Gants Hill, Redbridge and Wanstead, but money in short supply. I think this is really most interesting for its planning on Moscow lines. But let's go back in time quickly. I'm conscious that we're running out of time. 55 Broadway was the headquarters of London Transport. And for this, looking at that Tower of Healing again, looking at the towers he'd seen visiting New York in 1913, and Holden was particularly worried that people would want to get from St. James's Park, which is behind where I'm taking the photograph, to Victoria Street as quickly as possible, and would want to cut through the building, which as a when I first moved to London and lived in that area, Pimlico, it was certainly the exciting way back from a concert or the pub, cutting through the station at night. Here's Muirhead Bone's perspective. You see here, this is how there's the booking hall, and you have this sort of freeway face across this diamond-shaped flat. It's now blocked. They've expanded the entrance to the office for security reasons. And if you're coming through the station, you've got to come round through the space created in the light well. But the boardroom survived, or did survive, 10 years ago. Here it is in my picture. Though listed grade 1, and I'll come on to conservation in the perhaps discussion, this has been proposed to be converted to a hotel. Nothing's happened yet, and these designs keep being revised. And it's so complete, it would be very difficult to convert. There's the original typing pool. And again, sculpture. Henry Moore, Eric Gill, Samuel Rabinovich here, a lot of young artists producing these winds, I suppose, suggesting speed and travel on the upper parts of the building. And then Epstein producing a night, and this is night, and there's day, which is male, and there was again problems with the appendages over the entrances. And that the success of the London Transport headquarters, which won the RIBA's bronze medal for the best building in London, 1927 to 29, led in 1931 too to Holden being selected out of a whole raft of nominees to be designed the central headquarters or Senate House for the University of London. London University is sort of not a proper university in a sense. It issues degrees and sets standards for a whole group of quasi-independent colleges based around London and out of London as well. But 16 of the 19 bits of colleges and medical schools are around in the Bloomsbury or within a mile of this site immediately north of the British Museum in London. And William Beveridge, who was the Chancellor, helped secure the site. He is the guy whose report goes on to lead to the founding of the welfare state. There's lots of tying up going on here, but they had competition. They got the top 4 architects, including Giles Gilbert Scott, who you heard about from David, to come in for a meal and discuss their proposals rather than allow the RIBA to hold a competition. This way, the university could hold on to make a decision itself. And this was the original scheme. They were insistent on a tower, which becomes a book stack to the main library. And then this whole long site would be developed with offices, meeting rooms, places for big big functions, and colleges spaces for some of the smaller institutions. It didn't all get built. What you have is this tower flanked by officers and the smaller bodies, with this main hall, which you've seen in the publicity photos. This is the ceremonial hall, with either side 2 spaces used for public events by and large. And then on top, a huge library. And the smaller institutions, the war got in the way, Second World War. The college has rebelled, saying they wanted separate buildings. This is what was the School of Oriental Studies, now the School of Oriental and African Studies, one of Holden's last buildings that he had a hand in. And it's brick, and it's separate. And there was a battle over Torrington Square, which was a protected open space. So the university eventually stopped its proposals for building on it, were stopped. And after the Second World War, Holden turns increasingly to planning. As a senior figure in the Royal Fine Arts Committee, responsible for advising governments and planners on aspects of London design, particularly in London, he gets called on as a major figure, mainly to do planning. So this is the South Bank. Here is County Hall. Here is a proposal for a concert hall and National Theatre, all part of the London County Council's plans. Didn't happen because the Festival of Britain came along, but we got the Royal Festival Hall built on that very site with its entrance facing the National Theatre, precisely because Holden set out that is where it should be. So this plan never happened. Certainly, those road bridge is still got a railway on it even today. But if you look at the detail, you've still got this sort of quasi-classicism with the towers all stripped bare. So even towards the end of his life, Holden still sort of fair to this middle way between classicism and modernism. I don't know how much his heart was in the Tube building, but it's probably the bit he's best known for today, may not have been the bit that he was most appreciative of himself. So I will stop there. I'm sorry I've gone on for so long. There we go. Are my colleagues back in? Is David there?
Here I am, Elaine. Thank you so much for that. That was very insightful as usual, and it's so good to see the recent photographs as well. I suppose we have time for a quick question or two. And I thought I would start by asking just a fairly broad question, which is, would you call Holden a modernist by the end of his career, or was Holden something else?
That's good. I mean, he was called a modernist in his day, which sort of slightly surprised me, because I knew his Bristol work first, if you will. Therefore, I tend to think of him as an arts and crafts architect. And certainly when the government set out its advice as to what Victorian buildings should be listed, in 1981, it listed a sort of top leading architects. And it included Charles Holden, even though his work is all of the 20th century. So I think that's sort of a measure of how important the arts and crafts work was then. And I think the modern work has really become more appreciated in the last 30 or 40 years, particularly because we all travel on the tube. And, the tubes have their own style. And particularly when you get out of the crowds in central London and the Circle Line, those branching, they have a surreal quality, and it's something that we can all enjoy.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting to hear you say that you feel his heart wasn't really in those buildings. And it's certainly exciting to think about his Edwardian work and how important and interesting it was. I think the same is true of Giles Scott on some level.
Really, I mean, certainly for Holden, his big magnum opus was Senate House. That was his big challenge. And 55 Broadway, I think, is a better building. It's complete. It's got the underground, the quality of the underground and Frank Pick transferred to it, and it's got the sculptural interest, it's got the planning interest, but for him it was Senate House. Whatever you say about that mix of classicism and deco that's going on there, that's what he thought was right for public building.
That's very interesting to hear. Yeah, I know that Eric Mendelsohn called it the finest modern building in London, the Senate House. So clearly Holden wasn't the only one who appreciated it, though the critics at the time, I think, could be quite harsh about it. One more question, and then we'll wrap things up, which is that you talked, it was striking, I think, how good a condition many of these buildings are in. And it would be interesting to hear a little bit about the conservation system in Britain, since you're so deeply involved in work at English Heritage, Historic England. So tell us a little bit before we conclude, please.
Okay, so most say all Holden's work that survives, and most of it is listed, apart from perhaps the odd tube station like Alperton, which South Harwood had been altered. So the listed idea of preserving buildings came in during the Second World War. It was a way of stopping identifying what should be saved if they were damaged in the Blitz. And enshrined in legislation in 1944-47, mainly for protecting medieval and Georgian buildings, and then Victorian buildings start to become important in the 1960s, and the 20th Century Society continues to the campaign for the listing of more 20th century buildings. There is nothing yet listed from the 21st century. Normally buildings have to be 30 years old before they can be considered or seriously under threat. And Historic England, formerly English Heritage, advises the government on that selection. And you have grades 1 and 2 star, sounds funny, but it's about how they get, the top 10% of buildings can get grants, usually, or lottery money, and the Historic England has to be consulted on what then happens to them. So major works of repair and conservation, such as you saw at Midhurst. Bristol Library, I was very worried that water was getting in. My picture didn't show the nice rusty bit of iron that a leak had exposed. I didn't think that was terribly fair to the nice librarians. And then grade 2 buildings are largely under control of local authorities, and it's up to them to serve repair notices. So listing just means putting on a list, identifying it, and then what happens to a building is really in the hands of owners, local authorities, and a whole raft of people, which is kind of where, you know, things can fall down the gaps sometimes. And Holden's done pretty well because most of his buildings are in the public domain there or in the hands of major institutions. So hospitals can get enveloped, they never have any money. There were a handful of private houses, nothing very major.
Splendid. Thank you so much, Elaine. I will now hand things back over to Ted so that we can close up by 1:15. Thanks very much.
I'd like to thank both Elaine and David for an outstanding program today. I know I learned a great deal and thoroughly enjoyed it. I'd also like to remind everyone of the date of the next and final lecture in this series, Modernism, Revolution, or Reinvention, with Alan Powers, which will take place on Thursday, April 27. Information on the British Architectural Library Trust can be found on its website, thebaltrust.org. Information on the 20th Century Society can be found on its website, c20society.org.uk. Again, thank you everyone for joining us.